So you're saying, I like this. You created Kettlebell Fitbrit was created as a resource to demystify kettlebells. So what does that say? What does that mean? You think there's a mystery around kettlebells? I'd like to get into
Well,
that.
I like that. That's a fun question. Often a podcast starts with like, just tell us your history, but I like that you started and it was something a little different.
And I'm very interested
Um,
in the history, just as a side note. But I hear podcasts start always like this. So tell us a little bit about yourself. And while most of the viewers on our channel know you, it's not a very redundant question because they know you, and we want to get into your history. But sometimes I'm just like, hey man, let's talk about what we all love, and that's kettlebells in and all by itself. So just keep going.
awesome. Well,
What's the mystery?
and it does tie into my history at a certain level anyway.
Great.
But the mystery, I started lifting kettlebells and learning about kettlebell sport at the gym I first started working at, the Ice Chamber that was up in Northern California. And I discovered that there seemed to be this air of mystery around how to train for kettlebell sport, how to get the best technique, how to get in contact with these Russian champions. There just seemed to be this level of mystery that certain people knew the answers to and the rest of everybody did not. And I think that's in part because it's so niche that there wasn't a widespread flow of knowledge. I also think there was a certain level of particular people, kind of being in power, holding the reins for the kettlebell sport world, and at least in the U.S., that's what it seemed like. And I wanted to just proliferate some of the information. Like, if we really want kettlebell sport to grow, it can't be a mystery what it is or how to train for it. That's like, if no one knows how to play basketball or what the rules of the game are, then no one's going to play. So if no one knows what it even is a kettlebell sport competition and how do you do these different lifts and how do you prepare for one, then we can't expect the sport to grow. So my intention with creating a website was, hey, I have this unique knowledge of kettlebell sport. I've trained at this gym that has, excellent coaches and athletes and that has tons of knowledge about kettlebell sport and have given me permission to take that knowledge forward as a coach when I moved on from the gym. And I was like, let me see if I can package some of this information into bite-sized chunks in a way that people can understand and try to just be consistent with my website, because there were a few blogs here and there about kettlebell sport, but not many of them were active anymore. So I tried to keep something going that was fairly active with the
Great.
content being put up.
And that was what year was this? 2011, 2012?
I started lifting kettlebells in 2011, but 2014 was when I started my website. I moved from Northern California to San Diego,
Okay.
and that's when I started my website, when I
So-
kind of set out on my own as a coach.
Great. I mean, if I listen to what Steve Carter taught me, he told me around the 2000s was so 99, 89 or something like this. And in 2000s is when this whole thing broke, so to speak, when Pavel came with his idea and his ideology of kettlebell training. He portrayed it and brought it to the Western world. And so then Steve told me he kind of wanted to backtrack a little bit because he worked with Pavel and then was like, well, actually, we see stark differences between hardstyle and sport. So where do they come from? So you've discovered kettlebell sport in 2011. That's like you're really, one of the pioneers, so to speak, right? I mean, pioneers in the sense of I want to give it a broader audience and want to push a little bit more because, and that's one of my questions maybe that I'd like to have your opinion on, is when I started this or when Steve Carter taught us, I wasn't interested in the athlete aspect of training or going to championships. I was just interested in the nuances of sport. And when I started pushing those things, I mean, my form wasn't perfect back then. It certainly isn't now, but maybe I've evolved a little bit. But what I saw was that people misunderstood it. They were like, and maybe you heard this as well. If you rack rest the kettlebell on the iliac crest of your hip, and you have the solid rack rest position, and your upper body is slightly kyphotic, people go out be like, "That's wrong. That hurts your lower back." So you start smiling. You probably heard about this as well. And
oh yeah, many times. Yeah.
Many times. Oh yeah. So you're confirming my the stuff that I've encountered. And yeah, so you were pretty at the beginning, right? So to speak.
Yeah. Sorry, can you ask the question again?
My feedback was just I got these reactions towards the style of kettlebell training, kettlebell sport, right? So you got them as well. And when you started in 2011, I mean, Steve was here in 2019. So in 2011, you were one of the pioneers. So how was it back then? It was hardstyle probably dominating, or that's at least what I have seen in the world. So what's your take
when
on
I
this?
started kettlebells, I didn't know anything about the kettlebell world, or I didn't even know anything about hardstyle kettlebells. I had never heard of a kettlebell before. So I walked into this gym that I knew they used kettlebells, but I had no clue like that there were different types of styles or anything like that. So I just came in with, hey, I want to like have an outlet to do something physical, and I wanted to compete in something. So I kind of was interested in that athlete track that you're talking about. I didn't know that there was something called hardstyle until much later, because I very much was just at that gym that I was working at. I wasn't really on social media. Like I don't even think I was on social media until 2015 or so. So I didn't pay attention to any of that stuff, and I just learned about sport. And so my impression of kettlebell training was based on mostly the other female trainers that were at the ice chamber. So they were some of the real like pioneers of women in kettlebell sport, like Jessica DiBiase and Sarah Nelson and Maya. And so they were called the ice chamber kettlebell girls. So they were the ones who sort of made kettlebell sport more popular for women all over the world. And initially then it was just single bells for women anyway. So I think that specifically with regards to that kyphotic posturing thing, that was something that wasn't as glaring to me when I was first starting, because it's not as obvious with single bell long cycle as it is with double bells.
Yeah, with doubles, the difference, the stark difference when you rack two bells, how your back looks is way different to one, right? Wow. So you were exposed just to the sport.
Yeah.
Wow. So what was your impression when you first saw that there's a different, let's say like a different methodology of kettlebell training?
When I discovered hardstyle?
Yeah.
I think that I saw it earlier on as a more rudimentary style of kettlebell lifting. I'd say I had a little bit of like kettlebell sport snobbery in that I had learned it a certain way, and I thought that was the way. As I went along, you know, and learned, hey, this stuff is cool too. Particularly when I moved to San Diego, I started working at a gym, Core Strength and Conditioning, which they were doing predominantly hardstyle. That was their background, but they were starting to get into sport. So I learned more about hardstyle training and found more value in that, particularly teaching classes in that as well. So, you know, I wouldn't say I have a preference anymore. I also wouldn't say that I subscribe to like truly hardstyle lifting, because my hardstyle is more of a hybrid between sport and hardstyle. It's not.
I like that.
Some things like don't work so well if you've started in sport. If you try to do what's like a strong first hardstyle clean, that I could not get that down. I was so used to like not using my arms that just impossible.
I see so many similarities in the way I have encountered it, because I knew about hardstyle. Then with Steve, you know, Steve was more attractive to me because I didn't like this mentality of Pavel at first. It was like, you know, it was the Russian guy, the Spetsnaz guy, right?
Yeah.
And while I do see some merit in it, I think it's fun. I gravitated towards Steve. So when I had this experience, now I have recently learned the hardstyle swing. I've recently learned the bent press, just the bent press, the windmill, the Turkish get up, and its fundamentals, and in that way, I think it's a better thing to talk to the RKC Strong First guys who have more focused and honed in on the grinding lifts, on the grinds, than on the ballistics. But I was on that same page. I was like, I probably never do or never feel well with a hardstyle clean. With the hand insertion. And yeah, they work with different bells as well.
Yeah.
And the snatch is the same thing. And where you see these stark differences, that's so interesting. The similarities, because when you understand where it all comes from, then you see it in a different light. And that's,
yeah.
And you're mentioning hybrids, that's exactly what I call myself as well.
Yeah, and I've never really enjoyed the, I guess, conflict that's been there for some people between the two sides. I think there's been certain dramas in the past between people who call themselves hardstyle and people who call themselves sport. And I think, I'd rather call things like hinge style and pendulum style and just keep it more neutral and avoid these conflicts, because at the end it's like, you guys, you have more in common than you have different. You love kettlebells.
Yes.
So
that's
I think
it.
there's things to learn from both sides.
Wow. So you went in with a pretty open-minded spirit when you first saw hardstyle. We're like, okay, I'm gonna learn something new, and it wasn't like, well, that's strange. How does that supposed to work?
I think I was definitely biased towards the sport style of lifting, as the owners of Core could tell you. They would probably remember that I was more biased towards that. But the thing was that they were open to learning sport. And as they were open, I think that helped show me, hey, like, I should be open to learning this. Wow. There's no reason why I can't do both of these. It's good to know both. If I want to really master the kettlebell, I should learn everything you can do with it so I can help people no matter what their goals are.
Yes. Wow. That's great. And I felt the same as well. I was pretty biased, and especially I got a little, let's say, frustrated. And I talked to Dennis Vasilev about this. I told him, listen, it's so strange when you rack rest the kettlebell, even if it's just a single kettlebell, you rack rest it and people were like, that's destructive for your lower back. And then you get like, man, you don't understand it. And Dennis said something beautiful. He said,
this type of reaction, it's again, whatever experience you got first, it's much more difficult to change your habit, than establish a new one.
And I was like, oh, you're right. It's just, that's what they have seen for the first time, or they have been exposed to a certain way of training, certain way of lifting, and then they think the other stuff is wrong. And then I opened up as well after this great podcast that I had with Luca Kurcher from Kettlebell Hardstyle Pro. That's when I opened up towards hardstyle, and I was like, wow, both worlds. And what do you think? Do you miss out on something if you just go into one world only? What are your thoughts?
I think you miss out because, as I mentioned, if you want to use the kettlebell as a tool for people you're coaching, I think you miss out on people who might get more benefits from sport, or people who might get more benefits from, hardstyle type training. Because I do think that it's good if people have a foundation of more, hardstyle training or fitness style training with the bells before they go to sport. Because particularly if somebody is either new to training, or they're hyper flexible, or they don't have a ton of core strength or things like that, going into sport and relaxing everything may not be the best idea. I think you have to earn that relaxation with having built a certain amount of ability to tension. And I think other people may have too much tension. Someone's coming from like a bodybuilding background and they're super tight. They may not benefit from doing more high tension based activities. They might need either a hybrid or something more like sport where you actually teach them to relax?
So great, so great. You just answered my question that I've underlined because we got into this topic a little bit, and I wanted to have your opinion on, can you be too loose in sport? And you just gave a clear example, which is really eye-opening. It's like, hey man, if you're too relaxed, then you probably need some more tension, right? And if you're too tense, you probably need some relaxation. Wow.
And I think it's worth mentioning, and this may not be popular for me to mention with somebody who's sport inclined, but as having spent a lot of time training heavily in this sport, if you are training it for sport and for the extreme, if you're training to try to get better results, it may not always align with health, with optimal health, depending on the person. So I know that for myself, and that's mostly what I can speak from as my own experience, that I have a lot of imbalances from training that way, and particularly from sitting with heavy bells in the rack position. You know, I'm tight here, you know, it's harder for me to get to that open position. And I think it is important that if you're going to take sport to a certain level, that you do need to do work to stretch out or strengthen things that you're not stretching or strengthening within the sport. Because I think you will see with a lot of high level lifters, there are certain imbalances you can note posturally, either, you know, forward head posture or extreme lordosis or different things. And I noticed some of those imbalances coming into play for myself. So I think if someone's doing it more at a recreational level with light bells, I don't think the rack position is something they need to worry about. That being said, if you're starting to train this constantly and this is your only modality of training, I do think it's something you have to be aware of to balance those things out.
So you saw it with yourself as well as with those clients that you have prepared for the comps. I think I've read it right on your website. You've prepared one, and she has reached Master of Sport, right?
Yes. So I've seen it. She was doing Master Sport in Snatch. She achieved Master Sport in Snatch. So she did do long cycle, but not quite as heavily. Okay. But I do think I did notice particular imbalances coming up, or there are certain injuries that people are prone to if they do kettlebell sport heavily. You know, there's a lot of bicep injuries, there's a lot of shoulder injuries, there's a lot, you know, it's usually not back from what I know, although I know some people do get like an upper back tweak or something, but usually I think it's often like bicep, shoulder, you know, forearm. Like I had tendonitis on my forearm when I first started. And I think the other piece of it is that in my opinion, kettlebell sport training is not always balanced the way that it's programmed for people. So I think, like with anything in the fitness world, I think people have a tendency to overdo. And I think with sport, it's so easy to overdo because the point of the sport is to do tons and tons of reps. And
three lifts, and only three lifts, right?
3 lifts.
Yeah, that's it.
Yeah, so the same lifts. And I think you have to be really mindful in how much do you really need. And I think there's been a lot of proliferation of the idea that you need to train like X amount of volume, you need to train this many days per week. And I'm not sure if that's really necessary or not. Now, I mostly trained 3 times a week with heavy volume when I was lifting in the sport. So you know, that's the way that I trained, and it did work for me to a certain level, but it also, you know, injuries and tweaks along the way, and eventually to a lot of burnout. So I think that there is a more sustainable way to do it, and that it probably doesn't require as much as people think it does, provided they allow themselves the rest and recovery that they need.
These insights, hearing it from an athlete, and me engaging in it, working as a coach, and you know, drilling down into the niche of kettlebell training. And you know what we do is we just help people lose weight with some easy to follow nutrition and the power of kettlebells. And then I've started YouTube, and this thing seems to explode a little bit right now. So I'm really drilling into the niche. So from my understanding of biomechanics and you know, of how the body works, I was kind of thinking the same a little bit. I was like, okay, always racked in that hunched position. and you mentioned imbalances. And, you know, I was thinking like maybe you got these questions that I wanted to ask somehow in advance through telepathy or what's things? Telepathy? How did you say that?
Telepathy, yeah.
Telepathy, right? Because I wanted to ask, does kettlebell sport take a toll on the body at elite level? And you're just, confirming it. And I was thinking like, even, you know, with the guys, I mean, Master of Sport for women is 224s, right? So that's 48 kilos.
It depends on the organization. I think there's some organization where it's 2x20, but it's so hard to keep track because everything changes.
Okay. With the men, it's 232s in probably most, maybe, you know, with some differences. And then I was thinking, I mean, the 32s are heavy. And working with them, I never did it. I was like, maybe I got the guts, or maybe I had it if I would zone in and focus in and you know, work with a pro coach to go all in on the athlete side of things. But I'm just kind of worried. I'm 37, so I'm like, man, I'm not sure. I'm not sure that this is, I mean, performing sports at an elite level is always, you know, a little bit difficult. So you found some value that you were like, okay, wow, maybe Hardstyle gives you some balance, right?
Yeah, I think training with the kettlebell in different modalities has been really great for me because I've done sport for so long and have definitely suffered from a lot of overtraining. And now that I can't say that was kettlebell sport alone because I was doing other things. So I don't want to insinuate that kettlebell sport always causes overtraining, thing like that. However, for me, training at the elite level of lifting double 24s, I do think it was too much for my body. I think it was not sustainable, hence why I didn't, you know, I competed with 24 kg bells in long cycle twice. And after that, I had reached a place of burnout where I had to stop, and I had to stop competing. And I do think that I noticed when I started lifting double 20 kilo bells, I noticed a certain shift and transition in my body. Like I gained a lot of weight, and not muscle, but also fat. Like my body, I think, was trying to protect me from how hard I was pushing and these really heavy loads I was lifting.
Did you change your nutrition as well in that case?
No, I didn't. So it was specifically related, I think, to not having enough recovery and training super heavily.
Wow.
So it wasn't until I started lifting double 24s that or the second time around, the first time I started training for 24s, I was doing too much other stuff like handstands and ring training. And I suffered an intercostal injury that showed me, okay, I'm trying to do too much. I can't do that when I'm lifting this heavy. So the next time around I trained, I only did the training and like maybe some yoga or stretching in between, because I realized that if I don't, you know, take that time off between trainings, I will not have the energy because it's so taxing to lift that type of weight. And so I think that it's recovery, of course, is key, which is something that I wasn't really doing in the right manner for my body. And if I look back now, I think maybe if I had trained only twice a week, it might have even been better or more sustainable for me than to have do 3 times a week. It was just that much load was very, very heavy on my body.
Wow. And you mentioned that the training volume, do you think that even in that case, you could have done something different? You mentioned now twice a week. And do you think for an athlete that would have been enough to prepare for a championship and reach, you know, top 3?
I can't say for certain because I didn't do that at the time. I do think that for myself personally, like I'm not recovering enough between trainings. So I do think that if I had trained, say, only twice a week, but I actually felt recovered when I did the training, definitely think I would have been better off because, you know, you can only reap as much benefit from something as you can actually recover, you know, and that's something I've learned the hard way after years of doing too much and not seeing the results I wanted in terms of like skills I was training. And only in the last year and a half or so, really taking a step back and
Wow.
taking the actual time I need to recover. And by recover, I don't just mean, oh, I'm going to take 2 days to recover. Like, I'm going to wait until I feel like training again and I don't feel sore anymore. And sometimes that's 4 days. Sometimes it's a week.
And that's what the recreational population should take with them, or it would be best if they listen very closely. If athletes are telling you that, athletic burnout or just burning out from training is real, you're saying the same thing that I've heard Ed Cohn say in his Squat University podcast, where Ed Cohn said the problem is most people are lifting too heavy for too long. Mm-hmm. And then, and it was such a great podcast with Dr. Stuart McGill, the spine specialist. And he said, the problem is, and that's what you're saying as well, is the problem is people are training, lifting, and they want all this progress and they want all these results. And the body is starting to lag behind with the recuperation process. Mm-hmm. And you keep doing this long enough and something happens. Wow. And you're just confirming.
Yeah, and if you're training at the elite level, too, where you're really trying to hit certain PRs or certain competitions, that becomes really important, because those little things like just not being recovered enough can be the difference between that new PR, between actually peaking that day at the competition.
And that's also a little bit, the athletic mindset. The champion's mindset is like, I do whatever it takes, and then until it breaks, kind of like this. Right?
Yeah, I mean, that's definitely considered either, champion's mindset, or a lot of people in general, I think, have that mindset. I need to push myself that hard. Yeah. And that's something that I've had to spend some time examining. Why was I really pushing myself that hard? Because we could call it a champion mindset, but in the end, I was completely burned out and honestly unfulfilled in my life, even after having achieved like a championship. So for me, that required examination of what is that mindset really? Is it a champion mindset, or is it maybe like there's other underlying things where I feel like I need to push myself that hard for some other reason? So I think it's something worth examining, when we do have those tendencies to want to push and push and push, even if we can feel inside it's too much. Yes. Like, why are we pushing?
And your body's different for everyone. Your body's sending you these signals, and you're kind of, to a certain extent, maybe ignoring it, because, like you said, I want to compete at the elite level. I want to reach that championship. I want to reach that medal, and then you're going too far. Things break, and then I like what you're saying. It's like, and then you're unfulfilled anyways. I go home with the championship, but then I burn out. Wow, was it worth it? So, and I like what you're saying. Is like, is it a champion's mindset, or is it a mindset that has some underlying problems? Wow, this is great stuff, and I think I got this from Luca and from the Strong First ideology, Pavel, a little bit. It's like people are always chasing the burn when we talk about the recreational aspect, where people are just lifting and general fitness. And I kind of learned, like, wow, it's not always about the burn. It's staying safe. I mean, safety, of course, form, yes. But even, pushing yourself to a spot where, I like what Luca said. He said, when you work out, consider it as a practice. It's not about working out and working yourself out, but practicing, getting better at the lifts. But, at the same time, I still get it. If you want to compete, there's always this, the girl next to me, she's hustling hard, so I gotta make sure I'm at my top level. Wow. And so I
think I was just gonna say, if we take it even a layer deeper, I think often what people are looking for when they're pushing themselves hard or when they're exercising is, I want to look a way that's socially acceptable, or I want to achieve this thing so that people will like me or look up to me. I think it often comes down to acceptance and love, really. And so I think searching for ways to use exercise to be loving towards ourselves and to be loving with other people and to connect with other people may be something that actually at the end of the day ends up being more fulfilling, like cooperating with other people rather than competing with them.
Wow, well, that's deep stuff, you know, and what you're mentioning about this aspect of love and passion and being, you know, in our nutrition coaching sessions that are mostly women, we've had women cry because the topic nutrition cuts so deep. And not just nutrition. You mentioned, you know, acceptance or just, you know, being at war with yourself, with your body, and then discovering this self-love, this self-care, which is so vital. And at the same time, it requires an empathetic and passionate coach, right?
Definitely.
Somebody who's there to look out for you. I like what Dan John said. He said, you know, a good coach gives you what you want, but he also gives you what you need. Right. So
I wholeheartedly agree with that. I think that's tough at times to tell somebody what they need to hear if, you know, they're looking for something else, if they're maybe looking for a distraction, and as the coach you have to be like, hey, I gotta, you know, give you a little dose of reality, like in a kind and compassionate way. But you know, sometimes 100%. What's kind of compassionate is to be honest with that person,
to be honest,
and try to just hold a mirror for them.
And you can still say it in a very respectful and loving manner. But, you know, I've heard another coach say this as well, a very successful coach. Sometimes the coach has to sit down and tell you something that maybe you don't want to hear, but that doesn't mean that the coach has a license to talk down on you, right? It's always, I always consider it from an uplifting standpoint. You know, if I'm the coach, people look up to me, you know, they think you're that strong guy or that strong gal. And then it's so important that you're able to pull people up and not push them down. I just recently reacted to one video from one of those Biggest Loser coaches, and it's mind-boggling. It's you know, I got so mad. I had to cut out a lot of stuff from the reaction because I really exploded.
Yeah.
And you know, if it touches, you know, that stuff really touches me. And people be like, well, you're now very critical. Well, I'm critical towards professionals in a certain way. All right. If and that's why I love to do these reactions. I always try to stay as respectful as possible. But in that way, it was not pushing, it was not motivation, it was just pure sadistic torture.
Yeah.
And the guy was breaking down, and the form was, if you'd watch this, you'd go nuts. And
well, the awful thing is, like you said, that most of those people are torturing themselves already.
100%. And if I may just pivot a little bit, my question, or I'm just having two statements that I'd like to get your opinion on. There is something, they call it the Russian swing. And after I talked to Dennis, and you know, me not being an athlete, when I talked to Dennis, this was enlightening. He said, you know, we only do long cycle, snatch, and jerk. That's it. So I was like, so therefore the Russians don't swing. Yes, they have a backswing in their lift, but an athlete, I mean, you can give me a better perspective on this, but I never see Dennis do swings. Or just a swing, or double-handed, hand-to-hand, whatever you want to call it. So my understanding is the Russians don't swing. Yes, there is the backswing, and you can do it in the kettlebell sport where you work differently with your knees and your hips, and you catch the weight with your quads. Yes, I understand, but the Russians don't swing. So therefore, there is no Russian swing. What's your take on this?
I have been in many courses with Dennis where he does use swings as a conditioning exercise. And I don't know if that comes from Russia or if that comes from Dennis just using it. So I do think that he uses swings at a certain level. I've always done swings because it's the basis for, you know, learning the pendulum leg action.
Yeah.
I do think the Russians do swings. I've seen Senya do heavy swings. I've seen some of the other female athletes do heavy, like 32K swings if they're snatching the 24. So I do think that it comes up. Does it come up often? Not as often as most people who are just training with kettlebells do swings. But I think it essentially, the swing is like a portion of the clean or the snatch, right?
Yes.
So maybe that's
100%.
why there's that well, we can just clean or snatch. So yeah, if you're doing clean and snatch, you're already doing the same leg action. So you may not necessarily need it, but the swing is a more rudimentary form of doing that action, because you don't have to insert the hand and catch the bell.
Yes, 100%. So just my understanding is, that's great to hear that you see the Russians do swing. Just my understanding is somebody came up and coined it a Russian swing. So I was like, maybe I'm getting lost in the semantics, but I'm like, listen, there is just, because now you mentioned 32K kilogram swings. And my understanding, and that maybe pivots in another statement that I'd like to have your opinion on. And I heard this from Dr. Stuart McGill, which when you look at it biomechanically speaking, there is merit to it. If I swing a heavy kettlebell, let's say like a 32 kilogram, right? So the bell is in front of me when my hip is fully extended, kettlebell's at the top position, right? Somewhere chest level or whatever you want to have it. So there are shear forces involved in your spine. Because it's not like a regular deadlift where there's compressive force in your spine. You pull it up, you pick it down, that's it. In the swing, after the compression sets in, because you have to set up properly when you swing, and that's something that I see people, they pick it up and they don't start properly. That makes me go mad. I'm like, put it in front of you so you don't waste your first rev. So there's shear forces after the compressive force acts. As soon as the kettlebell travels outside, there's shear forces. So that's why I wanted to ask you, can you be too loose? My idea, and I would like to get your opinion, if you use the hardstyle mentality where I kind of like coin it now, brace to break. Your anterior chain, your hams, your glutes, your lower back, they serve as acceleration. So the kettlebell starts traveling. And your anterior chain, your abdominals, your quads, they serve as brakes so that you can engineer out the shear force. So my idea would be, if you swing heavy, you rather use more tension. And if you swing heavy and you don't have enough tension, what's your take on that?
I do think there's such a thing as being too loose. Like with any time you're using a weight, obviously you need a certain amount of abdominal bracing to protect your spine. So I would agree with that. I think that if people are, in their spinal position because they don't have the strength either in their, abdominals or their core, that they should learn how to brace better either before they're lifting that weight, or maybe regress back down to like a two-hand swing, or like you're saying, more of a hardstyle or a hinge type of swing. I think that you definitely can swing heavy with more of a sports style swing. I think you just have to be aware of bracing, but I think there's no reason why you couldn't, because it's mostly, the main difference is the leg action. So you still want to be pressurizing your abdominals and using those, but I think it depends on the ability at which you're able to do that bracing with a sports style technique, because you do have to separate a relaxed shoulder from relaxing your spine, like rounding your spine. You have to be able to keep the bracing through your spine while relaxing your shoulder. And often for most people, these two happen at the same time.
Wow.
So that difference has to be distinguished.
100%. I think that's what Steve Cotter taught me. He called it the power switch mentality. He was like, you have to understand which muscle groups in your body need tension and which ones need relaxation. And you have to differentiate between the two. So in my case, when you rack rest the kettlebell and clean, your legs are still tight. You have to really lock your knees, right? So the weight is carried by your pelvis, but your upper body relax, right? So that's more like that power switch mentality, right?
Are we talking about sport or hardstyle?
Just sport or sport in general. Resting the kettlebell. That's great. My idea is rack resting the kettlebell, even in sports. And I have a 28, a 32. I feel my legs are under a lot of fire.
Ideally, if we're talking about like competing, doing 10-minute sets, you don't want your legs to be on fire in the rack position. You actually want to have like relaxed quads, because your legs, if your legs are already burning early, you know, it gets hard to go fast on jerks. So you're going to lose steam going through the set. So ideally in the rack position, you're fairly relaxed. And this also comes to the point I made earlier about earning the right to relax. When I say relaxed, I don't necessarily mean that everything in your body is just completely relaxed, because if you've trained appropriately, certain muscles are just naturally going to be turned on. I imagine certain muscles in your core and things like that are going to have trained to sustain the weight in a way that works for you. So when I say relax, well, you are relaxing, but you're obviously still holding up the weight and going to be ready in a few seconds to do like a jerk movement. So
wow. You know, where I'm coming from is just, I thought about it the way, because my knees were always bent when I rack rested the kettlebell, and I feel really well now. Even maybe it's not a burn in my quads, maybe that's the wrong description, but I feel that they're tight, because if I don't lock my knees, then they start bending. So I know, okay, locking the knees, so I feel a little bit more tension in the quads. It's not burning, but it's still, it's maybe that what you're talking about, right? That little differentiating factor between, yes, relaxing, but still upholding the weight.
Yeah, and so you are still stacking the weight, and there's also mobility that comes into play there as well, because if your hips or your back or different areas are a little less mobile, you might be holding more tension on your legs because it's not as easy for you to get comfortable in that rack position.
And you know, I do get very comfortable in the rack position, but somehow I'm like, man, just I think that's more like the hardstyle ideology that's coming in. Man, just for safety reasons, just use a little bit more tension, and you're fine. Especially when I grab heavier weights. And wow, this is so good stuff. So for our last 5 minutes, Britt, I have so many other questions, but maybe we can talk about it the next time. I wanted to start this idea of Kettlebell Canon and Kettlebell Legends. Are you familiar a little bit with Star Wars?
A little bit, yeah.
Okay. So Canon means that's part of the official story. And Legends, that's stuff that fans made up, or that stuff that is not 100% completely right, but just, you know, we heard about it. Maybe it's a legend, right? So when I talk about Kettlebell Canon, I was just recently thinking about this. What exercises come to mind when we say, okay, we got to write a book, Kettlebell Canon? What are the most pivotal and important exercises that you would call Kettlebell Canon?
That's a good question. And this has shifted for me a lot over the years. So, you know, I did a lot of sport. I started doing some more hardstyle mixed in. Now most of my kettlebell training falls under like kettlebell partner passing. So I don't know if you're familiar with that.
No.
Like passing the kettlebell back and forth.
So yes. Yes.
So there's a specific system that was created called kettlebell partner passing.
Wow.
That it's about passing the kettlebell back and forth, but there's also training programs that are individual, and there's a lot of different movements from that system that I've never come across in other types of kettlebell training.
Wow.
Or as simple as using more rotational training or athletic type movement. So even like the simple like around the body handoff or around the world, as a lot of people know it.
Yeah.
That exercise I used to think was just kind of lame when I first started training kettlebells.
Okay.
And now I actually think it's a really great exercise because it trains like rotation, both for your grip and your core, in a way that nothing else does. You know, most kettlebell training is so much in the sagittal plane that you don't get much rotational work. I also think that simple is better for most people.
Yes.
That things like cleans and snatches are they're very cool, and I've done so many of them, and they're great. And at the same time, they can be very challenging to learn. And for people who, again, don't have that like bracing down, there's more risk involved with it. So I definitely think swings are obviously one of the most popular kettlebell exercises for many reasons. I think that, I'm trying to think of what else I like with kettlebells. Of course, you know, deadlifting and squatting is always going to be important.
And you know that,
I think, you know, one of the coolest part about the kettlebell is that you can string stuff together, of course. So that's always one of the best things, is that you can move from one exercise to the next. So I do love, like, the series that I put in my Kettlebells 101 video, I would say is a great series, because it gives people an idea of how to string movements together, how to get cardiovascular training with kettlebells. So, you know, deadlift, 2-arm clean, squat, just pressing the bell with 2 hands. I think that's a great way.
So you're just, you know, you're repeating what I'm seeing with our work with our clients as well. If you have, I don't know what your focus is 100%, but I work with complete novices and beginners, not athletes or, you know, people who have a sports background and want to get into athleticism. And what I found out works best is you always have to feel the kinesthetic sense of the person. First of all, sometimes they're having a hard time with the kinesthetic sense, and then it just takes longer, which is totally fine. Yet the ballistics are very tricky to learn in that case. So we have one client, we have one series: press, squat, deadlift. That's it. And then we've switched only one exercise, the deadlift with the swing. And since I have seen that she has so much trouble with the swing, we stayed, you know, no cleans, no snatches, nothing. And so you're kind of saying the same thing. Is like, yes, it's the you know, the learning curve, especially a kettlebell sports snatch, was just so highly complex when you first start out. So Canon would be for you swings, deadlift, squat, press, right? Anything more?
I wouldn't say I like the combination of those, but I wouldn't say like a single arm press would be in there for me, because I think a lot of people have challenges with overhead mobility. So the beauty of a 2-hand press is that it doesn't have to go, you don't need as much mobility to get up there. So the 2-hand press I like, because people can do it whether or not they have the full shoulder mobility. Single arm press, I don't think is great for everybody, because if somebody doesn't have the mobility,
100%. They're tight in T-spine and chest, and it's a mess. Yes, and you know what we start doing with people is just they start extending their arms. That's it. They don't need no weight, no nothing. It starts stretching. It's like, oh, that's tough. And sometimes I'm like, start stretching your arms, and they do this. And I'm like, do you think, not condescending, but saying, do you think that's fully extended? Yes. So you're 100% confirming this.
I think building that kinesthetic awareness through things like you're talking about, as well as I've found in the last year, even for myself, having trained for many years, that things like isometrics or tempo work is really, really helpful for building that kinesthetic awareness. So even just, you know, holding certain positions. There's another exercise I really love from I mentioned the kettlebell partner passing system that are called leg circles. So there's shin circles and there's thigh circles. And you essentially hold, like say for a shin circle, you would hold sort of the bottom of a deadlift and you just circle the bell around your shin on one leg and then the other, like in both directions. And as simple as it is, it's giving you strength in that bottom of the hinge position. It's really strengthening your back, your core, your legs, your glutes, and you kind of have like an activity you're trying to do, which is often better than just hold the position. It's like, hey, circle the bell 10 times around that leg, 10 times around the other. And that gives you this great isometric effect. And you're working like your bell handling skills as well. And then you can do a similar thing with around your thighs. And it's so simple, so basic, but excellent exercise. And it will like absolutely crush most people. Not like in a bad way. It will crush them as in they'll really feel everything, but most people can do it.
It's great. It's some awareness in it, some strength in it, some resistance, some wow. And you know, you're now opening up, you know, some of my thinking, because I'm usually like this around the body, passing it around your shin, around the quads. I'm like, come on, man, that's not the basics. But you're now really opening up my mindset. Or maybe the next time I would really, if you find the time, I would really love to dig into these partner passing, isometric tempo work stuff, which is really, really powerful. And it's, you know, it was a real blast talking to you, Britt. You know, I'm coming from that side of things where I am 100% tuned into the basics. I think, you know, it's the pressing, the squatting, the lifting, the deadlifting. And you know, you said it with this one arm press, for most people very tricky. Then they have to learn the hand insertion. They don't, or the elbows are flaring out, then they try pressing like this. And I've seen this from experience and tweaked it. So that's why when I reacted to your stuff, I was like, haha, we do that stuff as well. And because you see it out of necessity, right? You're not, I mean, if you're an athlete, you have a very high kinesthetic sense. And when you start coaching and working with people, it's like you have to really bring it down a notch and understand the beginner's perspective, right?
Yeah, and you're teaching things online to a big audience. You got to think, what's the lowest common denominator? How can I best approach something that anybody would be able to do and get benefit from?
100%. Wow. Britt, I really appreciate your time. It was awesome talking to you. And it's, just as a final note, it's always great hearing the athlete side of you. You're an athlete, but you're also a coach. So it's and you have this, from Dennis, I've heard some different things. From Dan John, I'm hearing different things. From Luca, it's the beauty of, you know, bringing this all together. That's why I want to do these podcasts. So thank you for watching. If you enjoyed the video, like it, consider subscribing if you want to see more kettlebell content. And if you're looking for a program that builds you up as a beginner to an advanced kettlebell trainee, and maybe you also look for some solid nutrition coaching, some basic stuff to help you get in shape and maybe lose weight, then check out 90 Days of Kettlebells. You'll find the link in the description, and we have a 14-day free trial included.